Salam, Namaste, Sat Sri Akal, Adab. I've always wondered about how India travels outside of India, how the world travelers travel into India, how does this entire ecosystem work. Today we have a very special guest. I've known him for some time. I've always been intrigued by his conversations. He's young, he's global, and his name is Santosh Kumar, and he's the country manager for Booking.com. For those who don't know, Booking.com is the world's largest OTA platform, ranging from flights to hotel bookings to alternate accommodation and everything else in the travel ecosystem. How do you know that India is prospering? And someone told me this very long time ago, and he said, Kunal, just stand on the highway, and if you see the movement of trucks and the frequency of the movement of trucks increasing, right, say week on week, day on day, you know India is progressing. At the same time, when you look at the number of aircrafts which are kind of coming into India, the number of hotel rooms, and these are the early predictor of success being built in India, you know India is progressing. And the curious person that I am, where are we even traveling? This religious tourism that we speak about in India, we know, you know, I know. But where else is India traveling? Where else is India traveling abroad? Let's uncover all of this. Stay tuned for Talk with Kunal Vasudeva with my very dear friend, Santosh.
Sport in itself had a very interesting kind of upbringing for me. You know, I always had that view that at some point I would play for India. Like, show me a person in life today who does not have regrets, and I'll tell you that they're probably lying. Regrets are so important that they help you understand what were the alternatives that you had in mind. And everybody makes mistakes, right? And you learn from your mistakes and you move on. So while consulting was great, I realized that I did not have the opportunity to build a business, to own a P&L, to manage a team. Those were not things that consulting taught me, right? So therefore, I was always clear that I wanted to get into industry, and therefore that shift via the MBA program.
So that earlier concentration when you were growing up, I was growing up, and pre-pandemic was the fact that there is a summer, there is a winter, there is a Diwali, right? The travels all around. Or maybe there's just a impulsive religious trip, road trip.
Correct.
Now that is not happening.
That is not happening because people are traveling more for experiences. They're traveling spur of the moment. Connectivity is much better. You know, you can take spur of the moment 4-day trip to Singapore or a Dubai or a Bangkok or elsewhere.
Or within India because of the
or even within India. So therefore, fundamentally, a lot of that travel behavior has changed.
And was COVID the catalyst?
COVID was, I think, a very large accelerator, making sure that from a skilling standpoint, we are providing a very consistent level of experience for somebody who's coming into the country. Everything that they experience on the roads, in the accommodations that they're staying in the flights or the trains that they're taking, etc., ensuring that level of experience is great. And that comes from skilling. What we say is every trip that you take with us, every transaction that you make with us, you will get immediate value back.
The power of the scale of Booking.com, you're giving that direct value back to the customer instantly.
Our end game is somebody wants to think travel, they need to think Booking.com.
Salam, Namaste, Sat Sri Akal, Adab. My guest is from Bangalore, so Nama Bengaluru as well. It's very interesting. I've met him a few times. He's been to ISH on one occasion. I've had a so-called power talk with him about the travel industry. I was supremely intrigued. I am a curious person, as you know. And from that perspective, I really wanted him to come on this podcast. It's been at least about 6 months because of the conflicting schedule between largely on his account because he travels so much. Without further ado, and I don't want to give it up too much, my guest today is Santosh Kumar. He's the country manager, India subcontinent for Booking.com. Santosh,
Thank you so much, Kunal, for having me. It's a pleasure, and guilty as charged.
Guilty as
I know. I would have loved to have done this sooner. But also because I'm a huge fan of the medium in general.
Yeah.
I think podcasting and what it's done in general for the digital consumption has been fantastic. So kudos to you for doing this, and thank you for pushing me to come over to ISH. I also love that experience. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, even the students last time, the sense of granularity that you kind of brought to that conversation, that's intriguing. Now, you know what? That's not available on mediums. And through this conversation, we will unpeel and unpack every aspect of, I would say, a consumer behavior. I am a sucker for consumer behavior. And I'll tell you what I do. And this is not taught in business schools world over. And I've been doing it for the last 20, 25 years. Randomly, once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks, there's no set pattern to it. My driver would take me to a very crowded, random street. High street, low street, mid street, any street, right? Largely today because I'm in Delhi NCR, so here.
Okay.
And I would just observe for about an hour.
Okay.
I would observe a kele wala. I'll observe a fruit vendor. I'll observe a mother and daughter walking hand in hand.
Yeah.
I would observe how people are driving. I'll just observe. I just love that body language, that whole vibrancy and the chaos which it kind of brings. And it gives me perspective. So a lot of people, I believe that you play golf for your perspective. Am I right?
I do. Whenever I can get the time and whenever the wife
allows
me, I'm on a golf course.
And that's a very interesting story. Bangalore boy, Delhi girl. We'll talk about that later.
Yes.
But tell me, Santosh, you're from Bangalore, right? You're a fairly young man, fairly handsome man, not as handsome as I am, but nonetheless. How was it? Huh?
You're just being kind.
No, I'm just kidding. But how was it growing up years in Bangalore?
Look, I think if I have to dial back the years, firstly, I come from a very sort of traditional, conservative background. My parents come from two Brahmin families, South Indian families. And growing up, it was always, very interesting because I saw the struggle, right, that both my parents underwent. And I think for me, it's always been sort of, very much in my face.
Conditioning as well, what you saw in the
conditioning, the values, the way they have, sort of created that foundation for me and my brother in our early years. So it was really part of growing up. And, so obviously that is a very strong part of who I am today. Right. And when I think back, my parents, obviously, my mother, she's from Mumbai, and she was one of the first 10 employees at HDFC Limited.
Oh,
okay. And then she spent more than 25 years with HDFC Limited.
The downtown office of theirs.
That's right. Yeah. Well, she started in Mumbai and then moved to Bangalore after she got married. But back with the founders, with Mr. H.D. Parekh, etc.
You're talking between 1995, I'm assuming.
Even earlier. HDFC Limited, not the bank, right? So this was in the
80s.
Around 1980, right? When HDFC Limited was set up.
Got it.
So I've seen the kind of struggles that she underwent. And, a startup in the true sense of the word, right? And now, of course, it's one of India's largest enterprises and, very thriving bank. So obviously she was a very big pillar of inspiration for me. And also her background was such that she's the one that I constantly go to even now for financial advice. Right. And she sort of almost runs the family, if you will. Right. And then my father, senior advocate in the Karnataka Bar Council, again, he has spent about 45 years in the profession. still talks about the day when he used to earn 5 rupees a day when he started out, right? And so, he's obviously had a stellar career over all that time. And so therefore, that's the background that I've come up with.
So pretty much education was right at the forefront, right? Because working people, law requires its own kind of a grind on education.
Yeah.
Banking required its own grind for education, especially in the 70s and the 80s or the 60s where they kind of came from.
That's right. And see, one of the things that they always told me was education is the one thing that nobody can take away from you.
True.
Right? So, but at the same time, I have to say that even with those very conservative backgrounds that they came from, they always encouraged me to do things outside of academics. So therefore, somewhere early on, my dad's love for cricket rubbed off on me, and I ended up picking up cricket. I played cricket professionally as well, up to a certain level. And then, but they were always of the opinion that I could always excel in both. It was never one over the other. They always said, look, you know what? You can do both. And you need to put your 100% into both. And thankfully, I was able to excel at both, right? So
it's very surprising you say that, and parents even to date, whether it's from the 60s generation or even parents like you, we invest in our children through our education, right? I never understood that till such time about 15 years back, I got into education. I'm still learning. And I always go back to the fact that why Indians invest in education. You could be a farmer's child. He has the same aspiration to a millionaire's child. Same aspiration. And the fact is, Indian parents, when they look at education, they look at the fact that there is discipline at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So the fact that there is an entrance exam,
Sure.
And I won't talk about that. That's another episode.
Sure.
But the filtration process happens there. The rigor that you apply before the entrance exam, the rigor that you apply before an exam, that discipline is what they're looking for.
100%.
Everyone knows the outcome would be very different. What you study to what you will become in life is completely two different things.
Yeah.
But it's that process of discipline. And it's that discipline they were manifesting is, please invest in education. You can't take that away from you. Because once that value is set, right, then it's pretty much cast in stone. So even if you want to deviate today as Santosh, but when you look back, every time your memory will drag you back into the values of that discipline, of that household that you were a part of.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a brother, older, younger?
Younger brother.
Yeah.
He's in the legal profession.
Oh, he's in the legal profession. So he took after your...
That's right.
Yeah. And are they based out of Bangalore?
Very much so.
All three of them right now in Bangalore?
They're all in Bangalore. Yes.
Beautiful. In the 90s or the 2000s when you were in Bangalore, growing up in Bangalore vis-a-vis, let's say, a kid growing up in Bombay, and now, of course, you look at Delhi, what differences did you see or did you observe?
Look, I mean, I can't comment as much as I travel now, Kunal. The first 20 years of my life,
you didn't travel much.
I did not travel as much. I did travel, but it was only to play sport.
Got it.
I traveled to many destinations in India and abroad as well, but that was always with my cricket team. And that in itself
did you pick up the nuances?
Tremendous amount of learning, right?
Yeah.
The nuances were, in terms of culture, for example, right? Especially when we would play matches, for example, Karnataka versus, let's say, Punjab in the C.K. Naidu Trophy under 19, right? Just observing how the Punjab cricket team would turn up to a game versus how we would turn up to a game. Looking at how you did train travel in that era, right? Unfortunately, today, the slow travel concept is not as ripe as what it used to be back in our day, right? We didn't have a choice. If you had to go to Kolkata, you had to go
Second class train.
Second class train, a 2.5-day journey. And that in itself was very enriching. As a 14, 15-year-old, undertaking those long journeys with a team, with a peer set, the learnings that came from that were tremendous.
Life skills as an unmatched, no amount of anything else can give you that kind of an exposure.
That's right. That's right. So I think sport in itself had a very interesting kind of upbringing for me. Right. So even up to the age of 19 or 20, I always had that view that at some point I would play for India. And when that dream went away, I was suddenly left wanting as to, oh shit, what am I going to do next? Right.
And why did that dream go away?
Well, the dream went away for many reasons. I think I attributed mostly to probably lack of patience on my own part, and probably also lack of mentorship at the right time. Which is why I also think it's very important, especially in today's world, for young students, executives to have the right mentorship at the right time.
Is it because of that mental conditioning?
It could be a little bit of that as well, right? The decision-making process, the investment of time. I had an artificial ceiling in my own head, which said by the age of 20, if I haven't represented or if I haven't played a Ranji Trophy match, I will give this up. And that's exactly what I did. I just stuck to my guns. In an alternate universe, I might have said, I will stick on to this for another year or two, give it my all. And then, whatever happens. There's an outcome, right? But I didn't give it the time that it probably deserved. And that also gives me the learning of, regrets, right? The importance of having regrets in life. Because, I hate those bumper stickers that say, live life with no regrets. I just think that's hogwash, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody has regrets. Like, show me a person in life today who does not have regrets, and I'll tell you that they're probably lying, right?
Yeah.
Because I think regrets are so important that they help you understand, what were the alternatives that you had in mind. And everybody makes mistakes, right? And you learn from your mistakes and you move on.
Philosophically also, I'll just tell you, at your age, you believe this way, right? But let's say when you go into the 80s, what a wise man once said is, what you don't want to take with you towards the end of your life journey are regrets.
Sure.
Because that invoice of regrets you don't want to carry with you, because you just want to ensure that all the liability turns into either you neutralize it
100%.
or you don't need to carry those kind of regrets. But
100%.
Yeah, you're right. At the end of the day, the initial life is all about that grind and regrets. And I'm a product of, I won't say regret, but tremendous, I hate that word failure, but fall, I would say. I love it. Even today, at this age, I know this. If there is something which is, extremely a difficult task or a situation, and I know I'm not going to succeed at it, you got my 100% attention. I'm one of those guys that say, I will make it happen. I don't know whether I'll be successful. I don't care, right? Because success for me, relative, subjective, chhod do sab.
Yeah.
But I don't care. I love it. My energy comes from that.
Yeah.
Taking up really, really difficult tasks and projects and stuff. And it goes back to that mental conditioning which you spoke about. Can I ask you, go back into your memory. When you spoke about for the lack of coaches, for the lack of all aspects, do you believe sports per se, as a personal opinion, I hope I'm not controversial with this, but do you think it's a rich man's or a rich person, not a man, but a rich person's end game? Because, of course, you have people coming from the system, right? And they have the drive.
Yeah.
But that could be just 1%. It's just that the 99% have got better opportunities, better gears, better pitches, better every aspect. And 1%, despite all the odds, are still out there. Which always makes me believe that, if I want to play golf, a normal guy does not have that access. Like in Bombay, I can tell you for a fact.
Sure.
Nobody has access.
Yeah, I mean, India has 200 golf courses, whereas
Bombay has
United
maybe 2,
States
3,
has
4.
20,000.
Yeah, reserved
Right.
for maybe the rich and the famous.
Yeah.
People like us wouldn't have been even a caddy.
Yeah,
Forget everything else.
Yeah.
So we won't even think about that spot
yeah.
in Mumbai.
Yeah.
But do you believe that it's a rich person's concept, because there's so much of failure, and then there is this social insecurity and security both?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Look, I tend to think of it a little differently.
Okay.
I think that sport is unfortunately hasn't been a big part of our culture growing up, right? In India, broadly speaking, right? When you think about societies, and a parallel I can draw is, for example, Australia. Right? Australia really punches above its weight when it comes to sports and athletics in general, right? I mean, like, look at their population, look at our population. The DNA of Australia is the culture there is such that, you know, it's a very outdoor culture, right? You're encouraged to go out there and play, and you're encouraged to be out in nature, right? In India, unfortunately, I think at least things are changing now, and I'm very, very happy to see how things are changing. Because I'll give you another good example is, an organization called Go Sports. It's an organization that we do a lot of our CSR activities with as well. They encourage grassroots sports development and they provide athlete support, right? Not just in terms of financial support, but everything in terms of, mental conditioning, training, having the right mentors. And so essentially the entire ecosystem that goes into an athlete's journey, and especially looking at athletes from lower income backgrounds.
Absolutely.
Right? Preparing the next wave of Olympians and Paralympians who are going to represent India. And there are many organizations like that today who are slowly changing. It's a gradual process, right, Kunal? And I think it's the development of where India is headed. That's where there is so much opportunity for us as a country.
Yeah, for sure.
Like everything else.
Yeah, but when you gave that Australia example, I remember I was in Sydney, I think in 1999, one of my first visits. The number of 4 or 6 hole golf courses I saw within Sydney is pretty much every borough, every sector had its own 4, 6. I don't know whether there's a right term that I'm using, in a 4-hole golf course or a 6-hole, but what is that?
9 holes or 18 holes, yeah.
Is it 9 or 18?
Yes.
No. And if it is a very small community, it still needs to be 9 hole?
Typically 9 holes is
So it must be the 9.
the smaller
right?
one. But they could have a par 3.
Could be that. But they were small ones. And every sector, like pretty much in Gurgaon, you have every sector. Every sector had it in 99. I'm only certain that continues to be there. The fact that there is access. What happens with the sport, what happens with education, any aspect, is access. Give that access, rest everything will follow.
That's right.
Right? Once the access is not there, right? And we're going to come back to this whole travel part of it.
Yeah. And access is a very big part of that.
Yeah, and access is also a very big part of that.
Yeah.
Just remove that access out, and people just won't, because you have to nudge them to it.
Yeah.
Sometimes people don't know where to go. You have to take them there. And once they see it, they say, oh, Jesus, I never expected this to happen, you know? So from that perspective.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's also about what alternatives are you creating, right? Because, with a population like ours, it's also natural, right? You're a parent today, you want to ensure that you're giving your kid the best shot at success.
But more power to your parents as well, for 2 reasons. Both TAMs,
Yes.
right? Education is right at that priority. Having sports to support education. And then, of course, you having your own latitude to choose whatever you chose.
Yes.
I think crazy. I always say strong parents raise strong children.
Yes. No, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's by strength, I mean the mental fortitude.
Yeah.
They don't allow their children to fall. That mama will say, stand up.
Yes.
I haven't raised you for this. Stand up and face.
Yes.
And that's typically that India story. I see it everywhere. And that's beautiful. Okay, let's move. Where did you do your education? Especially college, masters.
Yeah, so look, I'm an engineer by education, but I say engineer by education only because even though I went on to also get a master's in the US after that, and that was around the time that I had to choose, right, between staying back in India versus pursuing a master's degree. I ended up pursuing the latter, which was a master's degree at Carnegie Mellon. So I have a master's degree in information science, again, a very technical field. But then I figured out that, coding was not my strength.
But Carnegie Mellon in information science was the best uni and continues to be the best uni in the world even today.
Yes, I had a fantastic couple of years there. Some really, really smart students, great faculty. And that also brings you down to earth, right? Because you go in there thinking you're the bee's knees. And then you realize that everybody else is much smarter than you.
You kneel down in front of the other bee knees.
So it was a great, leveling ground for me.
True.
But at the same time, it also told me that while I loved technology, I figured out that it was not in building tech, it was more in selling technology was where my strength lay, right? So therefore, I was able to then make that shift.
And your intent to go to Carnegie Mellon was eventually to stay back in the US, or you had plans to come back eventually?
Look, I think I always somewhere thought I wanted to come back. I wasn't sure how and when that would happen. But also because I was in this very confused state of mind when I graduated. And I think this is also like, sometimes I really go back to how people plan careers, for example, right? Because I have a lot of people sometimes who approach me and tell me, what should my 5-year plan be? What should my 10-year plan be? And I hit those questions also in interviews, right? When you say, what do you intend to be doing 5 years from now? Who the hell knows, right? Like, I don't have a 5-minute plan, sometimes. So I think it's really, and people who know it are very few.
Yeah.
There are very few people who are born knowing exactly this is what I want to do, right? Like, everybody is not a Sachin Tendulkar.
Yeah, but true. But they talk about it once they reach there as a reflection of their journey, not in the moment.
That's right. And it's always that journey, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it was no different.
Yeah.
So it was, so therefore coming out of Carnegie Mellon, it was, I got into consulting. Why? Because I was confused. And consulting was the best possible outcome for me at that point in time because it gave me access to multiple industries.
True.
Multiple functions.
As a senior analyst, I'm assuming.
As a consultant,
correct.
I joined Deloitte. That was the first company that I worked with. And it gave me exposure to multiple industries where, I was able to deep dive into a particular domain in a very short period of time.
So right.
And, not only build my analytical skills, but then I was also able to figure out the process of elimination, knowing what I don't want to do, right? Sometimes that is also
so right.
important.
Yeah.
So therefore, that was sort of the way I started with consulting. And then after 5-6 years of doing consulting in the US, I figured it was time for me to come back to India, Asia. I wanted to be somewhere in Asia in general. India seemed like the best bet because obviously this is where family is. And so therefore I decided to come back, get an MBA and then re-enter the
you did another MBA after that, right? Yeah. And what was that thought process? Because you were already in consulting, you knew how exactly deduction, logical reasoning, business aspects.
Yes.
What was the motivation for you to do your
I think I was a bit of an oddball in the MBA class because, I went to Indian School of Business and most people get into MBA wanting to get into consulting or investment banking.
Yeah.
But I did the opposite. For me, it was primarily a gateway back into India to build my network.
And that ecosystem.
Build my ecosystem and my network in India. And also pick up concepts, because I've always enjoyed formal learning, right? So it was a great opportunity for me to do a 1-year
intensive
focused, intensive program. and essentially then figure out, because I knew I wanted to be in industry.
Correct.
Because, while consulting was great, I realized that I did not have the opportunity to build a business, to own a P&L, to manage a team. Those were not things that consulting taught me, right? So therefore, I was always clear that I wanted to get into industry, and therefore that shift via the MBA program.
But this is interesting, and this is especially for the younger audience, right? Because this whole aspect about MBA right now is very overstated the world over. Here you did your master's, Carnegie Mellon, very specialized area, did consulting. 5 years of consulting is a good, especially when you learn about sectors and you go deep into those sectors as well. Coming into India, going into ISB, the best in my opinion, right? We're super intensive. Coming back into this ecosystem of understanding the India right now, the India business, right? My question is not this. My question is, were there any new concepts that you learned? Because you had already applied most of the concepts in the US. And someone listening to you who perhaps wants to use a similar route, let's say in the US, he does his master's, comes back to India, does not know anyone in India, gets into ISB. To that Indian young boy or a girl, what would you tell him?
Look, I mean, I think the way I approached business school, and I always believe in the concept of different strokes for different folks, right? So there is never a one-size-fits-all approach to these kinds of things. The way I went about it, Kunal, was very simple. I said, look, there are 4 hours of classes a day. I will give my 100% during those 4 hours, right? I will learn the concepts. I will pay full attention to what is being taught in class. Outside of class, my funda was I will do everything that the institution offers me. Okay, because I was not in it for the grades.
Got it.
Right? Sure, grades would come naturally
that
at some
experience,
point.
the clubs, the centers, the research.
That's right. It was
everything.
networking with the folks who came to visit me on campus, or to visit the campus, right? There's a constant stream of executives who would come in. There's a constant stream of seminars and workshops and, study treks and work groups and whatnot that used to keep happening on campus. And my idea was to do absolutely everything.
Correct.
Right? And partake in the experience as a whole, right? Not purely from an academic standpoint.
And that mind was made up before you joined ISB?
That mind was made up before I joined. So I was very clear. So even going into, the Indian B school system has this concept of day 0, day 1, etc. from a placement standpoint, which again for me was alien thinking, because at Carnegie Mellon in the US, the school did not guarantee me a job.
True.
Right? I had to apply on my own strength. And when I graduated from there, I had 6 job offers, but not one of them was because it was coming through a Carnegie Mellon placement process.
And of which you harvested at least a year ago, because you had to network outside.
That's right.
Do your internships, do all those summer projects over there.
Right? So here at ISB, day 0, day 1, I was the only one, I was probably one of the few people sitting in my dorm room and not going out and having those interviews. And so obviously at some point there was a little bit of insecurity, right? Like, am I doing the right thing? Everyone else seems to be doing that. What am I doing, right? But then, I was also sure that, I again constantly reminding myself, what was it that I set out to do? And just being...
Sometimes it just comes across that from a very young age, you were very clear on the outcomes that you need. Maybe in the moment outcome, or maybe 3 months down, 6 months down the line. I just want to go back and see, where does this confidence, does it come back to that family? Mom, dad, brother, the way you had grown, sports. How does this piece come together? Were you always clear as a child?
I don't think so. I think it is a matter of conditioning over the years, I would say. I wish I was more clear on certain things earlier on in life, Kunal. But, like I said,
that's life journey, right?
That's life journey, exactly. And you learn from every single...
But I haven't heard many people. There are absolutely exceptional fragment of a percentage.
Yeah.
Whether it's an IM or whether it's ISB, in this instance, that day 0, day 1, if they don't partake in that, it's like, oh my God, my life is ruined, because day 7, you are actually nobody.
No, but I think it also comes from being able to take sometimes snap decisions on certain things, which might have a very long-lasting impact, and being comfortable with that, right? Even when I left the US, I was earning, as a 26-year-old, I was making $170,000 a year, with an apartment that my company was paying me to live in New York City, right? So one could have argued, like, why did I do that?
And which year was it?
This was in 2009, 2010, 2010.
16
right?
years back, 170,000 is worth, if not anything, about 600,000 today.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, I don't want to do the math there.
No, let the youth aspire.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
India needs to be rich before it grows old.
Yeah.
Period. And that youth, if they can aspire, right, they're going to look at you and say, you know what? I love what he's saying. I can do it. Why can't I dream of that 600,000? Even in India or New York or anywhere in the world, I always say, export yourself. Eventually, you're serving India wherever you are.
That's right. And ideal situation is if you can go out, learn everything that you can from the best of what the world has to offer.
Yeah.
Right? Also contribute wherever you are. And if you can find a great way to come back to the country, nothing like it, and help India build.
I'll give you one stats, which I heard, secondary sources. Indian diaspora remits about $250 billion back into the country. Yeah. Right? The second stats layer of the stat was, assume they were all staying here, right? They would have only contributed to about $1.3 billion cumulatively. So outside, they're putting the money back. And this apparently, when we are at about 7,000 per capita, 8,000 per capita, this would be about $1 trillion.
Wow.
So that $1 trillion of inward remittances by the Indians, right? Isn't that as patriotic as patriotism could be? You could be anywhere in the world and they're putting back money into India, whether it's in gold, whether it's in real estate, cash, whatever the case, the money is coming back.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful thing.
It is.
When did this whole travel tech aspect within you? Because you were an MD of a travel tech firm much before Booking.com, right?
Yeah. So I think, look, after B School, American Express happened. Again, by accident, right? It was American Express Global Business Travel. And I think that happened.
Was it out of ISB or was it
straight out of ISB? I attribute that to two reasons. One is I'd done a stint. I'd consulted for American Express on the card side of the business, premium cards marketing.
In the US?
In New York.
Okay.
I'd done a project, a customer service 360-degree project. Actually, probably one of my longest consulting stints for about a year for Amex. So that was already there on my resume. And then second reason I attribute that to, and I don't know if she gets the credit or the blame for this, is the manager who ended up hiring me at American Express, right? Liz Ortiguera. Liz is now with World Travel and Tourism Council. She's the Asia MD there.
Okay.
And Liz hired me out of business school and I felt that was a dream role for me because it was running a small business unit within American Express with P&L ownership. And access to all of the American Express network. And it was a very entrepreneurial role, managing a small team, right? Essentially running the travel partner network at American Express. So again, she took a bit of a leap of faith with me because I was young with no experience in the travel industry, but I was managing partners who had 30, 40 years of experience in the industry. Seasoned hands, right? Like large travel agencies. And I was running those partnerships. And that's where I think the consulting experience
helped you with this.
Helped me with this because I was able to come into a domain that was new very quickly and learn the ropes.
Would you call people like Liz sponsors or mentors?
I would definitely say she's a bit of both.
Okay.
Probably more of a sponsor. But essentially, people like her, I have a few folks like that. I'm very privileged to have 3 or 4 people like that in my life who I can go to for any advice.
And are these people, Liz to you, someone else to me, some unknown people to unknown people out there?
Yeah.
Are they those silent catalysts who come into your lives quietly in your journey, and they, professionally I'm saying, and turn things around? Have you observed that in your career until now?
100%. And that's a two-way relationship, right?
True.
Always. It has to be a two-way relationship.
True.
A mentor-mentee relationship. You can never always expect one person in that relationship to do the heavy lifting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It has to cut both ways.
Yeah. So where did it eventually go? So you joined American Express?
So I did that for about 5 years. I did a couple of different roles.
And that was in India?
That was in India. And then...
and by this time you were married? Were you a married man?
Yes, that's when I moved to Delhi, got married. And then during my time at American Express, I was approached by HRS, which is a Central European, started out as an OTA, but now has transformed into a business travel accommodation, SaaS-based.
Just for the younger audience, what is an OTA?
OTA, online travel agency, essentially a digital marketplace that connects suppliers, travel service providers with consumers.
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll also put a balloon on the side talking about OTAs.
Perfect.
Right?
Okay. And so I was approached by HRS to set up shop for them in South Asia. Seemed like a really interesting entrepreneurial role where I would have a lot of freedom, the ability to start a business from scratch in a new geography. So I took on the challenge, worked there for little over close to 5 years.
Would you call yourself an entrepreneur at that time? An executive entrepreneur?
At that time, very much, right? Because I literally had to do everything in terms of not just setting up the office, but making the first sale, going out and knocking on multiple doors, in India, trying to sell a SaaS-based technology solution in a highly operational market like India. Not easy to do, right?
Let's just talk about this, and I'll tell you why. Again, this cuts across the audiences who would love to hear from you. Let's trace back. Carnegie Mellon, Masters, Deloitte, ISB, didn't partake in day 0, day 1, American Express, an employee, now almost like an executive entrepreneur. And this journey, right from Carnegie Mellon to this, is about 12 to 15 years, I'm assuming.
Yes.
End to end.
Yes.
When you became an executive entrepreneur, the way you were thinking, right? Very independently, sales, marketing, being a janitor yourself. Is it a completely different ballgame? Or
very different, very different. It's a mindset shift you have to undergo, right? Because it's...
I go through it every day, hence I'm asking you this question.
Yeah.
Is it all amount of that mental conditioning of 14, 15 years as an employee?
Yeah.
Does not prepare you day 1 of being an entrepreneur?
No, it doesn't. And the amount of unlearning that you do is tremendous.
You just have to, let go of the baggage. You're absolutely right. And suddenly you find that, you know what, I was good at finance, I was good at accounts, but it doesn't really matter. This requires a completely different hustle.
Correct.
Did you go through that?
Correct. And the hustle that I discovered, Kunal, was sales.
Beautiful.
The hustle of sales, which, is fascinating, right?
Yeah.
The ability to deal with rejection. Is a really interesting one. And that's something which, again, I think sales is such a great
leveler.
And I think
the most important characteristic, I would say.
I fully agree with you. I think it is the most important skill set, especially if you want to go higher up in any organization.
Absolutely right.
Because it gives you exposure to every single function that exists.
Yeah.
Because you're not only selling externally, but you're also selling internally.
Absolutely.
To a very large extent. And you're also learning the product to a really large extent, because you look at the best salesmen or the best saleswomen, they are the ones who know the product in and out, right?
Yeah.
And
I would go on my limb and say pretty much like, it's like HUL in India. You know what they have done, right? You could be from anybody. You could, and I am Jamnabai, Narsi or Narsi Monji, whatever, go into rural posting.
yes,
Understand your consumer rural and then claw your way up back into urban. If you don't understand, if you don't know how to sell, you don't know anything.
yes,
And everybody must know how to sell, because even as an employee, you're selling your talent,
that's right.
right? I always say, if there is something on your mind and if you want a raise, right? I believe I want a raise. You think I may not want a raise.
Sure.
And so I will still put a case that why I deserve a raise. And that's selling talent, right? A lot of people don't do that. They hide behind emails. So if one thing we change and everybody does sales, to your point, the rejections, it's not the affirmations or the success, is that 99 rejection. And that, I think, when you go back to your early childhood, sports is about that rejection.
Correct.
That ball that you play.
Correct.
You thought it was a square leg ball, but eventually you kind of got out. That rejection.
Yeah.
Right? It plays out.
Sachin Tendulkar has 800 innings in international cricket. Out of that, only 250 times, he has got at least a 50 or 100, right? Which means
the remaining.
Every 3 times he went into bat, twice he failed.
Yeah, there you go.
You know, so you're failing more than you're.
And that mental conditioning which kind of comes from sales. So this stint taught you sales.
It taught me sales. It taught me organization building as well, right? Because the importance of having the right team, building the right team, hiring the right people, making a lot of mistakes along the way.
Beautiful. I love it.
Tremendous number of.
Talk to me about people dynamics, which nobody ever taught you, which you only learned through your journey of life. Because I think when you go higher up, you will leave your sales behind, because then you have other layers doing the sales, other layers doing the marketing, and all you're doing is human resources. Nothing else. So if you ask me what is a managing director's, a CEO's role, of course, strategy and all, of course, separate.
Yes.
It's human. At the end of the day, you are leading people who are leading the business.
Yes.
Right? So,
no, 100%. I mean, even today, like majority of my time goes into, helping my team bring out the best in themselves, right? And ultimately, it's that when you think about what's the function of a manager,
it's exactly
Andy Grove said this really well. In his book, Andy Grove, the former chairman, CEO of Intel, where he says the manager's output is essentially the output of his team and the broader team, right? The team that he does not manage, but his team eventually ends up working with.
And it's surprising, I'll tell you where the negative correlation to this is in business schools world over. Human resources as a subject for everybody at that point in time is probably last on the priority. And you go back to school after you become a CEO and it becomes your first priority. So when you're espousing it back, let's say you go back to your alma mater, you're saying, what is it that you will shed off when you're 50? You say, I will shed off everything. I'll only cling on to how to handle people.
Sure.
But when you're in your 30s, you say, okay, you know what? It's not very important for me.
Sure.
Yeah, from that perspective. Beautiful. We spoke about American Express. We spoke about this stint as an executive entrepreneur. What happens next in your life journey?
So what happened next was the pandemic. I had the fortunate experience so I reached a certain point in that journey with HRS where I felt, I achieved a certain challenge that I set out to do. And then I said, look, it's time for me to do something else, right? And I think the COVID pandemic hit. It was a great opportunity for me to reset a little bit, right? So then I went out and for a period of about 12 months, I had an opportunity to try a lot of different ideas, right? Prototype a couple of things. I even built, for example, there are 1 or 2 things I can tell you, very interesting things, which I ended up not pursuing, but I built like indoor play gyms. I learned woodworking.
Okay.
And I built indoor play gyms, which eventually my son ended up using.
Okay. So what was an indoor play gym?
essentially like, you have those play gyms which have like a slide and swing and all made out of wood.
I got what you're saying. Or you have those things which you claw up the wall.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Like the pickler sets, whatnot. There are a lot of companies that are doing that now, but of course, I was toying with that. I built it by hand. I mean, not entirely. Obviously, I learned the basics of woodworking, but I built prototypes, right? So I tried things like that. I tried other opportunities in the e-commerce space, etc. I did a little bit of consulting as well for,
Pretty much a natural extension of that 16, 17 years of your life.
That's right. Then I came back to travel in some way because travel was again starting to pick up after that lull of 2020 and 2021. Came back and did some consulting in the not-for-profit space in travel. And then in the meantime, Booking came about because Booking.com was looking for somebody in this role. And it was just a, right time, right place kind of thing. Booking was always a company that I'd admired from far. And it was, the opportunity opened up and that's where I'm here.
I can speak about Booking.com, but I think you're the best person to talk about it. Just give a sense to the audience how large this company is and what it does worldwide.
Yeah. So Booking's journey has been very interesting, right? So when you look at Booking.com, we've existed now for well over 25 years, like 27, 28 years.
Started from Netherlands, right?
Started in the Netherlands. It was started by a engineer, a techie in Amsterdam, who saw the need for bringing hotel rooms online, right? That was the problem that he discovered early on. It just grew from there. It came to a point, I think roughly about 2006 or so, when Priceline Holdings, who owned Priceline in the US, saw an opportunity to acquire Booking.
And that time Booking was largely a very European unit.
That's right.
Travel
very much European focused. After Priceline acquired Booking, Booking grew rapidly to the point where Booking.com now, we have other brands as well, right? But Booking is the majority brand in that set of brands that we have. And the holding company also changed name from Priceline to Booking Holdings.
Got it.
To reflect Booking's contribution to that overall pie. And Booking essentially then expanded very significantly outside of Europe, coming into Asia Pacific, going into the US, etc. And now today we are pretty much present in every country in the world except for a couple of geographies.
And largely the largest OTA.
It is the largest travel company in the world. When you look at market cap, we are approaching $150 billion. And that's Booking Holdings as a group. But like I said,
you have some brands as well, right?
That's right. We have other brands: Agoda, Kayak, Priceline, OpenTable. So 5 brands that are comprising Booking Holdings. But now the journey has transformed in a way where we started out doing just accommodation, and now we are trying to cover the whole gamut.
Got it.
Right?
So is it a more of a horizontal platform now?
It is, you could say that. So what we have done is we've introduced flights, car, attractions in the last few years.
End to end of a customer journey.
End to end. And that's if you look at the natural evolution, what's happening with platforms today, generally, and from the Indian context, Zomato is a very interesting example, right? They started out as a food directory, an online food directory. And look at where they are today. They're a food discovery events.
I think what DP has also kind of done is the fact that hyper pure, I believe that's the right term.
Yes.
And that's like the complete integration to all the restaurants.
Yeah.
Today, he's a playbook.
Yeah.
As in, if you have a concept in mind, just go there.
Yeah.
And they give you the entire playbook and go ahead and run it. Yeah. And don't worry about anything. The design will come from me. The vegetables will come from me. The meats will come from me. Every aspect.
That's right.
It just becomes very easy. And that's essentially what Booking.com
That's essentially what we're trying to do, because we want to take friction out of the travel journey.
Yeah.
Right? Because there is still, when you think about traditional journeys that we all undertake, at some point, if something goes wrong in any part of that journey, it has a cascading effect to everything else, right?
Mm.
The flight is delayed, your car pickup is delayed,
Correct.
your hotel check-in is delayed, etc., etc.
I want to kind of deep dive into this, and I'll tell you where I'm I want you, of course, because you handle the entire Indian subcontinent, Indonesia, and we'll come to these regions separately. But how is that platform even thinking today, right? Largely, you have 4 or 5 billion people on Earth. You would at one day want everyone to use that, and that's everyone's kind of dream, right? But how is the platform even thinking? If that platform was a person, how is it thinking? That end to end.
Yeah. So the way we look at it is, see, Kunal, we are a marketplace, right? We are a two-sided marketplace. We have supply on one side, which are driven by our partners. It could be accommodation, flight, cars, attractions, all of that. And then on the other side, you have consumers.
Correct.
Right? And for us, it's all about the flywheel, right? How are you ensuring that anybody who's coming in and visiting this platform as a consumer is essentially finding what they want, right? And our end game is, somebody wants to think travel, they need to think booking.com, right? And that can be hard to do in today's world, right? When there is so much choice.
The variables, everything is a variable in travel, right?
That's right. The plethora of choices that are available. And when you think about the way consumers are traveling today is very different to how we used to travel even maybe 5 years ago, right? Because what we've seen is travel behavior is fundamentally changed, right?
Can you elaborate that? This is very interesting.
So travel behavior, in one sense, earlier it used to be 1, maybe 2 long trips set apart during the course of the year, right? People would say, oh, my summer holidays, 10 days, I'm going somewhere. Winter holidays, again, a week, I will go somewhere, right?
Are you alluding to the Indian subcontinent right now?
Primarily Asia, right?
Primarily Asia.
Whereas now it is shifted, where when you think about from the Indian context, people are planning travel around long weekends. And we have, 8 to 10 long weekends in the year. And people say, every long weekend, somebody wants to go somewhere, right? And so they're taking multiple trips of shorter duration.
Got it.
Right? But what I'm saying is, travel has become a constant through the year, where even if somebody is not actually traveling, they're dreaming of going somewhere.
So that earlier concentration when you were growing up, I was growing up, and pre-pandemic was the fact that there is a summer, there is a winter, there is a Diwali, right? The travels all around. Or maybe there's just a impulsive religious trip, road trip.
Correct.
Now that is not happening.
That is not happening because people are traveling more for experiences. They're traveling spur of the moment. Connectivity is
Much
a lot better.
Yeah.
You can take spur of the moment 4-day trip to Singapore or a Dubai or a Bangkok or elsewhere.
Or within India because of the
or even within India, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, fundamentally, a lot of that travel behavior has changed.
And was COVID the catalyst?
COVID was, I think, a very large accelerator in that sense. I think also, if you look at the journey that platforms like us have had to undergo, there's been a lot of work that has happened behind the scenes, not just recently, over the last, so Booking's journey in India, for example, we've been in India now for about 13 years, right? 12, 13 years, thereabouts. And the initial years were all about, having feet on the street, which is having our teams go out, educate partners, bring them on the platform.
Correct.
Heavily moving business from the offline into the online, so tremendous amount.
Is it because of skepticism India had, or the fact that, this entire digital stack also coincided, the fact that platforms, booking.com, being booking.com, gave that seamless experience. So everything, all those pieces came together. And by the way, COVID happened.
Yes. You said it very well. I think there was a lot of things. There's basically been a bit of an inflection point, right?
Got it.
That COVID has accelerated in some ways.
Yeah.
A a lot of it has had to do with the infrastructure. It has had to do with the smartphone penetration.
Correct.
It has had to do with the fantastic last mile connectivity now that India has. Right? The cost of data. The cost of data is 1/5 and in 1/50th in India versus that in the US. Right? So all of those factors have led to this.
It's amazing that you say. Have you ever reflected the fact that, you know what, had this instead of 2022, 23, had the entire ecosystem existed in, let's say, 2005, 2007, no matter who we were at that time, maybe we were just a $1 trillion economy. But the fact that there was no discovery, there was no internet, innovation was there. And had it been there, everything would have been in 2005 what we are seeing in 2022, 23. Isn't that right?
Could be. I think that's the natural evolution also of countries, right? When you look at their per capita incomes, their GDPs, etc.
And that's very interesting that you spoke about that per capita. I really want to get that because you have a global lens right now with you, right? Very recently, you also published a statistic about how the global travel is happening, right? Booking.com pioneered that report. Is my understanding correct?
Which particular report?
Was it about global travel? About a few months ago, you had put it in the public domain?
Yeah, so we do a few reports. We do one on travel trends, which are global in nature. We do one on sustainability, which is an annual report.
But the latest one was the travel trend?
The latest one was the travel trends we put out for 2025.
Correct.
That is global in nature. It was a survey that we ran across multiple countries. From an India lens, we put out the How India Travels report, which is a deep dive on the India ecosystem. This is an annual report that we are starting to do.
And has it been published?
We started in 2023.
Got it.
The first edition. Last year, we did a deep dive on the inbound.
Got it.
Play into India. This year, again, we are starting to work on our 2025 edition.
Got it.
So a lot to look forward to.
And pretty much is, of course, at the end of the day, there is this huge data and how the consumer thinks, how it uses that data, and hence
that's right.
It reflects
what we saw was there was a massive opportunity to do thought leadership from a consumer lens in travel, in the travel industry, right? Because I think when you look at the travel industry in general, travel and hospitality in India, there are some companies, consulting companies, research companies who are doing a fantastic job, but it's limited to certain aspects of the industry, right? Like, for example, Kappa will do
aviation. Correct.
HVS, Hotelivate will do
hotel consulting,
branded hotels.
Correct.
Right? Again, a sliver within the overall accommodation space.
Right.
But what we saw was there was a opportunity to put all of that together from a consumer angle, right?
But inbound
as well as domestic.
Wow.
As well as potentially even outbound.
And is this a public report or is it a trade report?
This is a publicly, we put it out there. We usually have a partner, thought leader who comes along with us. So the first year it was McKinsey in 2023.
If somebody wants to just download this report, can they download it? Oh,
yes.
Beautiful.
It's available in the.
I'll put it in my link in bio.
Yeah, in fact, you see it here.
Oh, beautiful. I love this. This is intriguing for me.
Yeah.
How does India travel?
Yeah, so I think, I think if I have to pick out a few patterns, right? One is, I told you how the number of trips have evolved recently. The other interesting thing is when you look at the overall spend for India, India is a very heavily domestic driven market still, right? Indonesia is also very similar, right? Heavily domestic in nature.
Does it link to per capita?
It links to per capita, but it also, I think, links to our population, right? It links to the diversity of travel experiences that we have.
So essentially what you're saying is the same 2 million Americans would travel, that's 2 million out of 300 million. But 2 million out of 1,400 million, right? 140 crore population is, it just sounds sliver.
It's a sliver, but you know, it's a very interesting evolution, right? And I can also draw a parallel with Europe and Asia Pacific.
Beautiful.
Because Europe today, when you see traditionally, 70% of travel that's been booked by a European based traveler has been for travel within Europe. Okay, 70%.
Because the connectivity is so.
Because of connectivity, because of short distances,
And you have 20 countries, 30 countries.
because of ease of access.
Correct.
You know, there are no barriers to entry, right? So Europe was naturally a very self-sustaining
Correct.
travel market.
Very organic
That is
by itself.
and that has happened for many decades,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Asia Pacific today is at 65%, the same number, despite longer distances, you know, in Asia to get from one country to the other.
Yeah. So minimum is 5 hours, let's say Singapore, Hong Kong, or the Middle East. That's what you're saying.
That's right. You know, if you want to go, for example, from Paris to Berlin,
That's like
what is
about
it? Like an hour, hour and a half flight, or if you take a fast
about
train,
3 to 4 hours on TGV. That's what it is.
that's right. On a high-speed train, it's you know easy, right? 3 hours.
Yeah, 3 hours.
So, but in Asia Pacific, the distances are a lot longer,
Yeah.
right? Despite that, 65% of travel today booked by Asia Pacific is Asian. Forget even Asia Pacific, right? Asian travelers is for travel within Asia, right?
Wow.
And so there are these corridors that are starting to emerge. So Asian travel is resembling that of Europe.
Beautiful.
And so similarly for countries that have large domestic spend, could be India, Indonesia, could be Japan, you know, that is also natural that domestic far outstrips,
Got it.
you know, international
Absolutely.
travel, right?
Got it.
While international will also grow, domestic is continuing to grow leaps and bounds.
Do you think, and this is very interesting hypothesis, right? You take India as a country, for whatever reason, the per capita, the way we are, and let's say put where Greece is, right? And you're just part of the European Union. And now there is 20, 30, 40 countries to explore over there. But when you look at our region, subcontinent, like you have Bangladesh, you have Sri Lanka, or you take a 5-hour flight. Right? I think that also serves as a huge catalyst because there is that so organic travel within 2-3 hours. Actually, you're right. From if I have to go from Paris to, let's say, Geneva, it's about 3 hours.
Correct.
By the high-speed train. That's it. Right? It's like literally Bombay, Pune, which is happening.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So my point is that intra-regional travel, Kunal, is something very interesting that we are seeing and that will continue. We'll continue to double down. The other one, very interesting, is family-based travel and group-based travel.
Okay.
Multi-generational travel is very interesting from the Indian context, right? Indians love to travel in groups.
Got it.
Has always been part of how we've traveled, right? As families, groups of friends, etc.
And you're talking outbound?
Domestic also,
Both,
right?
Yeah.
Both, wherever we travel, we love to travel in groups, right? And I'm talking obviously from the FIT
I got it.
leisure standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Less from a business travel.
And some of them will take their Maharaj and their cooks also along with them.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that group travel behavior is still very, very strong in India.
And is that an India thing? Is that an India thing? When you compare it, let's say, with Indonesia?
It is predominantly an India thing. There are a few other countries in Asia which also demonstrate that kind of behavior. But in India, it's particularly strong.
More pronounced.
More pronounced. And because, you know, for example, like solo travel, while it's great, it's, you know,
Risky.
very less
Yeah,
in India from the Indian standpoint, right? So therefore, that's another very interesting one. And now there are use cases that are supporting it. Because, for example, you look at the rise of alternative accommodation.
True.
Right? That supports the use case of traveling in a group where you want the privacy, you want access to amenities which otherwise are hard to get in a hotel, which the alternative accommodation is able to offer.
Are you seeing a trend? I'm just asking you. The way I probably deduce this in my head is, as a family, if I'm going, let's say, from here to Indonesia, Singapore, I'd rather look at an alternate accommodation like the B&B, right? But when I go for business, then I look at a hotel. Is my understanding correct? Is where the consumer behavior is shifting now?
Yes, I mean, you would see probably less business travelers opting for alternative accommodation. Also, the nature of alternative accommodation yes, there are city apartments and whatnot, which cater more to mid-term and long-term stays. For a business traveler also might be interesting, right? You see a lot of people who sometimes undertake longish business travel. They want, something more like a serviced apartment, or they want something which feels more like home, right? As opposed to a hotel. So in that case, an alternative accommodation could be interesting. But typically the alternative accommodation fits very nicely with that
Group
travel, leisure travel.
I think Indian being that very smart, very, I would say, unit sensitive, right? That unit price per person, cost per person is like, it's a distributed cost. So if I travel with 10, if I take that alternative accommodation,
works out economical.
Per bed, it works out very economical because they are on a budget. At the end of the day, they want to explore, they want to discover. You ask any Indian, he'll say,
you might get a private pool.
Yeah, you might have a private pool.
You have, sort of butler service.
Probably one for the cost per bed, per experience.
Yes.
Right? Wow, beautiful. Any other insights?
See, the other thing is from a domestic standpoint, when we look at it, there are a couple of interesting factors, right? One is religious travel, which has always been the case.
Correct.
Indians have always traveled to these destinations. But what has really, I think, taken it to the next level in the recent years has been the new supply we've added in all of these destinations, right? Whether it is a Puri, a Varanasi, a Tirupati, Ayodhya, what we saw recently with the Kumbh, where we're continuing to see even after the Kumbh, we're still seeing traffic in Prayagraj, right?
And this is across the spectrum of affordability.
Correct.
You have just regular tented accommodation here or the dorm accommodation here to, let's say, luxury.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So that is a very large part of how Indians travel. And then the other one is Indians are starting to get out there more and more for events, experiences, right? We've seen multiple things. We see the IPL every year. That is a phenomenon now. But we've seen the 2023 World Cup, where, we actually sponsored the 2023 World Cup as part of our ICC deal. And we saw tremendous traffic, huge spikes in the cities whenever, there were these matches that were scheduled, occupancy levels, ADRs going up. And we've seen the same with all the music concerts, right? The latest one, I think, was Coldplay in Mumbai, where we saw like a 120-fold increase in the searches. Just phenomenal.
Beautiful.
Right? So,
and even take a Singapore Grand Prix. I think it's 50% are Indians who are traveling from here. Sitting in the stands or standing in the stands. Of that Grand Prix. So that's kind of interesting. When you draw that parallel, let's say, to the Indonesia market, do you see similarities? How are the Indonesians traveling?
So yes and no. I think in terms of similarities, look, ultimately from a demographic perspective, very similar, right? Large population, growing disposable incomes, more people entering the middle class. The median age in India is 29, 30, somewhere thereabouts. In Indonesia, it's, I think, a year younger. So in a sense, even younger population. They also spend 6 hours a day on their smartphones, which is mind-boggling for me. And also very, very vast geography, right? In terms of when you look at Indonesia.
Correct. It's if you take the breadth of it and you put it somewhere, it's as big as the US in the width.
That's right. But you can also say connectivity there still remains a challenge, right? Because of how it's a scattering of islands.
Like an archipelago, right?
It's an archipelago. So therefore, connectivity is intrinsically a challenge.
True.
But when you see West Java, obviously there is a lot of traffic there in the big island. And then there's Bali, which kind of stands alone, right? And Bali is by itself a hotbed of tourism. But very interesting that the government there is promoting, they call the super priority. They have a priority of 5 destinations that they're promoting outside of Bali.
Got it.
Right? And so that
was what Ireland did about 15 years ago. Krabi.
Yes.
And the other islands which were there.
Yes. So that is a conscious move in a sense to limit a little bit of over tourism that is happening to Bali, especially from a inbound perspective. and drive more tourism traffic to some of these newer
Does the
destinations.
report also kind of tell you Indians prefer a destination over the other? These are the top 5. They first go to Dubai, then they go to Singapore. Are there any data to support that?
Yes, so we publish both domestic destinations as well as outbound, international. So from an international standpoint, look, you have the usual suspects. You've got Bangkok, Singapore, Dubai.
That would be your first travel.
They're always usually up there in the top 5, right? But then we've also seen now the emergence of new destinations, especially short haul.
The Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan.
So in a couple of different regions. One is Central Asia.
Got it.
It's helping now. For example, I think Indigo flies to 4 different countries in Central Asia.
They do. Yeah.
And that is, we've seen like, Almaty, Baku, etc. Top 10 from a short haul perspective, which we never saw previously.
Yeah.
We've seen Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh City. We've seen Bali as well because of direct connectivity between Delhi and Bangalore.
Not very well connected, right? Indonesia is not very well connected with India today.
There can be more.
There can be more.
I know that the governments are working on more bilateral connectivity. But what we are seeing is anytime there is direct connectivity added and there is an easing of visas, it leads to an exponential increase in traffic into that destination from India, right? So therefore it's a very interesting pattern.
And also the fact that, let's say if you have a US visa today, right? Entry into Dubai or the Middle East is on arrival. Vietnam is on arrival, right?
Yes.
Bali is on arrival.
Yes.
Tashkent, I think it's on arrival if I'm not mistaken, the Central Asia as well. I think those things also kind of matter. Schengen is a little bit more, I would say, a difficult visa because of obviously the kind of norms they want. US on a complexity level is one layer above.
That's right.
Again, because of the disclosure norms and all those kind of things which happen.
Yeah.
Beautiful. This is something which I've been extremely curious about. Hopefully you have an answer. I often say it's a country masquerading as a continent, right? How come? Of course, I totally understand Paris has 10 million visitors, largely 4 or 5, 6 million must be coming from Europe. So it's like more of a domestic travel. It's like people coming to Delhi. Then I read a report about New York, right? The inherent population of New York is, I think, 8 or 9 million, right? But there are about 50 million tourists cumulatively.
Yeah.
I'm assuming of which 30 to 40% must be Americans traveling.
Yeah.
But it's also the world traveling to New York. Maybe that's a gateway to get into other. This rich heritage, every aspect, conceivable aspect we have in India, culture, noise, vibrancy, colors, heritage, 5,000-year-old civilization. How come we are not attracting the kind of traffic which perhaps maybe a X country or a Y country does?
Yeah.
What do you think the reason could be?
So look, before we go into what the reasons could be, I can tell you, I think what has worked really well for India is the recent push on infrastructure is fantastic, right? When we look at, the fact that our airports now have doubled and will continue to increase.
For sure.
When we look at the high-speed rail network that we're introducing, when we look at the doubling of national highways that we have, when we look at our UPI infrastructure that we have in the country, financial inclusion, all of that is tremendous because that's precisely the kind of investment we need if we are looking at connectivity within the country, both from a domestic as well as from an inbound standpoint, right? Giving access to new destinations, which previously was never even on the radar for travelers coming in, right? Which is great. When we look also at supply, branded supply, 70% of new branded supply is going to come in the tier 2, tier 3 destinations. Which is great. So all of that, I think, are long-term positive gains for us. Now, why are the inbound numbers, how can we increase those inbound numbers, I think there are three things. And we went to it in some level of detail in our report last year. There are three things that we think, we can continue to focus on. Number one is marketing, right? Continue to see how we can pump in more investment.
Pretty much the way South Korea does.
Marketing standpoint, in terms of pure financial resources, but also in terms of storytelling.
Correct. The attractiveness of a destination.
The attractiveness, building on the Incredible India campaign,
So right.
which was fantastic when it came out. What can we do to refresh it?
Right.
What can we do to make it more current? And how can we,
And this is a collective responsibility. And I think
it's a collective responsibility.
This entire hospitality industry, I would call it. It's everyone's
public-private.
Public-private.
Public-private, right?
Government has to do its bit.
Yes.
Private has to do its own bit.
Yes.
Right? And that's the only way.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two is you look at the visa applications. I think, India can leverage its technological prowess.
True.
One, in terms of making sure that the visa application process is more streamlined. Make it easy for people to come in, right? Remove the barriers of entry,
Correct.
right? Essentially.
Yeah.
So it's an easy fix, this one, in my opinion. Number three is the last mile experience, right? And that has a couple of different factors, right? One is in terms of making sure that from a skilling standpoint, we are providing a very consistent level of experience for somebody who's coming into the country, right? Everything that they experience on the roads, in the accommodations that they're staying in the flights or the trains that they're taking, etc., ensuring that level of experience is great. And that comes from skilling, right? Making sure that we have the right skilling at all levels. And that's where I think, like the ISH model, I would love for India to have maybe 20 ISHs.
True.
Right? If we can ensure a consistent level of skilling and ensure that from a delivery, from a
I understand what
experience that a traveler is having when they're coming in, they're finding the value for what they're pumping in, right?
So essentially what I'm kind of hearing from you is, Kunal, access is there today. The port of entry is only getting better. Yeah. Of course, forget this top 7 cities. They have the world's best airports, but the remaining 20 also are getting upgraded. The road infrastructure, the high-speed infrastructure, that's also getting more rooms. Branded rooms are being added. We just need to take care of those barriers of the visa entry, which is there. And of course, the end experience. I only wish I'll add one more to this. And I think we had this once offline about the fact, I think for tourists to come in any country, right, you need to have, it's a very colloquial term, you need to have footpaths. It needs to be walkable. We don't have walkable cities. Any city. Firstly, it's huge. You've been to Shanghai lately?
Not after the pandemic.
Not after that? Have you been to Chongqing?
No.
No? Right? So it's the most advanced city in the world, in my opinion.
Yeah, okay.
You should see the way it's walkable. The fact that there is business district, there is the shopping, and as chaotic, like Sadar Bazaar. As chaotic on one side. But for the tourists to come, it's like boulevards which runs, if not anything, at least about 15 to 20 kilometers.
Yeah.
And they just, by the lakeside, by a restaurant, by something. Over here, we just don't have walkable cities. I think if that aspect, we really think, and let's say, you know what, Delhi, Jaipur, and they take 5-7 destinations, Mumbai, right? Make that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, for a tourist, you just have to Uber it out, destination to destination. But a tourist comes there to partake in that culture.
Yes.
That culture can only happen through walking.
Yes.
Number 2, I believe, I think, and that's a sad part of it, and I wish once the country is richer, that aspect would be eliminated, is where you have our Garib brothers and sisters, at a local signal, they take arms. Obviously, it's not their fault. It's by virtue of their fate, destiny, whatever you want to call. It makes a tourist very guilty. You don't want to, and when they see it, right? Obviously, they haven't seen this kind of aspect, and they feel guilty about it. So when you say an Indian, I have observed this. This is one consumer behavior which I spoke to you about when I parked my car. Is you'll find an Indian whenever somebody is coming, knocking on your door, on your car window, rickshaw, whatever, bike, and asking for alms, you tend to look that side. You don't look at that person, not because you're rude. I've picked it up for the last 15 years. Is because you're guilty. As an Indian, we are guilty. We feel sorry. When we feel sorry, we look there. We can't confront this. I think these are the small things which we kind of do. And making a footpath is for our children at the end.
Yeah, no, 100%. I agree. I think you have to make our cities more repeatable in terms of people wanting to come back again and again, right? And when you look at a Singapore, a London, or a Dubai,
correct.
I'm sure all of us have been there multiple times, right?
But can I tell you, you go to Singapore, you go to a Dubai, and more power to them. Beyond 4, 5, 6 things, there's nothing to do.
Yeah.
After 3 days, you're bored.
Yeah.
This place, you could be exploring for the next 1 year.
Yeah.
And every state, every food, every ingredient, every experience will take a lifetime for you.
Yeah, no, I agree. Storytelling.
And we just need to kind of storytell.
Yeah.
Tell me, for Booking.com, where it is, conversation won't be complete without using the vocabulary of AI.
Okay.
Right? And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
For the longest time, it is on the predictive modeling, right? There is a consumer behavior, you predict that. Now, when you have other AI tools and eventually there will be agentic AIs who will be kind of coming in. When I look at the platform today, personally, I've used it. So I can tell you, and I don't say it because yes, you're here. It's seamless for me, right? I had to go to Singapore last minute.
Okay.
For me, it was seamless. Last minute, I did. I went to Booking.com. It was seamless for me. I use that for other destinations as well.
Sure.
When I find everything seamless, how will AI help me now? It's intriguing me.
Yeah. Look, I think as far as AI is concerned, I can tell you that for us, we have used AI for about, well over a decade, right, Kunal? We've used it in multiple parts of our business. We've used it, today, to give you a little bit of a sense, we are bidding on 1 billion plus keywords on Google, right? And when you're managing so many keywords, when you're managing 29 million accommodation listings, etc., it is humanly impossible, without the use of AI, to be able to constantly optimize and manage that depth of content, right? So AI has been used very heavily there for content modeling.
And it's been used for some time.
It's been used for some time, right? It's been used also in terms of our language translations, etc., right? Now, recently, ever since the generative AI came into the picture, agentic AI came into the picture, it's starting to hit the consumer, right? The consumer never saw this before, right? And for us, what we've done is we've taken the OpenAI integration and we've built on top of that.
You've layered it up.
Trip planner, which is now a part of the website and app experience.
And very, very inherent to what I want to do as an individual would be very different to a person B and a person C. Very customizable.
The ultimate idea is to probably hyper-personalize it.
Beautiful.
But we're still not there yet, right? This is a journey.
Of course, yeah.
And I think right now we're at a point where AI is an enabler in that trip planning process. It's not the ultimate. We're still not seeing that people are using AI entirely to go in and
it's early days as well, right?
Discover, but also book travel.
Yeah, it's early days, but a year from now, 2 years from now, I think it'll become a way of life.
It could be. I think the use cases are mind-boggling. What we are looking at is how can we use AI to improve customer service support? How can we enable less
The
contact
friction
points.
Yeah, and less friction. Bring it down to literally zero.
That's right. Less friction for travelers and also for partners, right?
partners.
We don't want a partner to be constantly bombarded with questions, right?
Yeah.
At least first level basic questions from consumers, right?
Correct.
Where AI can easily do that for you today.
Yeah.
So those are the use cases that are already there, right? We are also looking at use cases for cross-selling and upselling, different amenities and rooms that are available at a property, etc., through the use of AI, right? So I think, again, scratching the surface, very interesting to see what this can progress into over the next few years.
So when you're part of the global forums, right? Global leadership or booking.com, right? Part of what are they talking about now? As in the next 2 years? I know you don't want to see, you don't know what's going to happen in 10 days, but what is booking.com talking next 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah. So
lay down, what are we going to see?
Yeah. So for us, see, the focus is point where we overtook our closest competitor, OTA, in the last reported quarter on the flights, right? And then all of the other categories like cars, ground transportation in general, and attractions is something that we want to continue to solve for. Like, for example, flights is now live in 55 plus countries. Cars are available in 130 plus countries. Similarly, attractions, we have tied up with the likes of Cloak, Viator, etc., and we are trying to offer attractions across.
But for flights, you're also competing with the same airlines who are also digitizing their entire experience, right?
But that will always be there, right? Every brand wants to drive more direct traffic. For us, the way we look at that is it's no different also to the accommodation space. But the way we look at it is what can we do to drive incremental demand, which is always very interesting. If you look at the hospitality industry today, India is sitting at 65, 66, 67% occupancy in the best year that we've had.
Absolutely.
There's still 33 rooms going unsold.
Yeah.
What can we do to drive that incremental demand? So it's always very interesting. And
except for stupidity or some players of driving in the peak traffic Indian consumers away from Goa. That's a separate podcast altogether. I have spoken about it earlier. I think it's absolutely stupid.
Yeah. So I think that's how we are looking at it, right? How can we drive all these other categories? How can we connect it better to the consumer? Right? And that is taking up a lot of our time and energy.
But as a consumer also, to your point, what you just said, and I'm contradicting myself.
Yeah.
Why would I go just to their airline platform for a ticket, right? As I said, I had to travel within 24 hours to Singapore.
Yeah.
And booking.com, this happened about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Give me that seamless experience.
Yeah.
And at that time, I didn't even know you, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just talking as a consumer because there was a cab, there was a hotel, there was that full experience which I did. And it was seamless for me.
Yeah.
You read platforms like this, and then if the platform can give, to your point, that hyper personalized experience in the future.
Yes.
Right? And I think there you have in this so-called demanding world, a loyal customer.
Yeah. And that's where, loyalty is really interesting, right? Because today, 60% of our global traffic comes direct.
Wow.
Which is through our Genius customer. So Genius is our loyalty program that we use. And if you booked your trip to Singapore recently through us, I'm sure you are a Genius customer. The interesting thing with Genius is it's based on the instant gratification model, as opposed to, you take a traditional airline loyalty program or a traditional hospitality loyalty program, you have to take 20 flights with them.
Correct.
Or you have to stay 10 times or 20 times with the hotel before you will qualify for a free stay.
Yeah.
Whereas here, what we've done is a little different because, we don't believe that you have to earn all these points and then you have to redeem something. And, and typically what happens is if you're like me, you would have earned a bunch of points and then you forget. And before you can redeem them, the value of those points has gone down so much that you barely get anything in return.
Yeah.
Right? So what we do, Kunal, is we flipped it around. What we say is every trip that you take with us, every transaction that you make with us, you will get immediate value back, which is through a discount, or it would be through a free breakfast.
And that's the scale that the power of the scale of booking.com, you're giving that direct value back to the customer instantly
on every transaction, right? And now we're starting to connect that across categories, right? Because it started with accommodation.
Got it.
Now the fact is, if you booked your hotel in Singapore and if you also book your, I don't know, Singapore Airlines or Air India flight with us, then you might be eligible for a discount there because you're a Genius customer who booked a hotel with us, right? So the idea is, how can we connect that in a better way, right? And we are seeing that seems to be working, right? Genius, we are finding more and more Genius users on the platform, and we're seeing better conversion.
To the point, a Kunal who comes onto the platform, all right, either through discovery, through word of mouth, referral, or perhaps I've seen booking.com ad. How are you ensuring that I eventually stick to that platform?
Yeah.
How are you building that loyalty? The Genius is one aspect. I'm not aware of it, right? I just come to a booking.com, maybe I see a Genius, right?
Yeah.
But how are you ensuring that, that repeat business? Because for you,
yes,
it's that long-term.
Correct.
Repeat is what drives real value for booking.com.
100%. And that goes back to how are we driving demand, right? Because when you think about it from a demand perspective, in today's world, it's becoming more and more challenging to keep the consumer engaged on a platform, right? And when we think about our funnel, our marketing funnel, right? You start with high intent marketing, right? Or rather, you start with low intent marketing, right? Which is, I'll flip it around, right? You start with low intent, where it's essentially it's about discovery, right? So what we want to do there is, when people think of travel, we want them to think of booking.com. So what we do there is, we do a ton of sponsorships. We do a ton of celebrity endorsements. So, for example, sports is one thing that we've doubled down as a brand, right?
Essentially, what you're saying is what Nike did to sports, booking.com does to travel.
That's right. So for example, what we're doing is, in all the high impact events. For example, it's MLB, Major League Baseball in the US, or the FIFA Women's World Cup, or Eurovision in Europe, or the ICC events that happened, etc. We took a bet to double down on those sponsorships, right? The Super Bowl ads that we're doing, even though they cost a ton of money,
crazy. Yeah.
We've said, we want to be there, right? Every year. So that's at the top of the funnel, right? Then the medium intent is where it starts to get really, really interesting, right? Because this is where it's a challenge for those eyeballs, right? Because there it is, that's where you start to lose people from the platform, right? Because what tends to happen there is, you've got people on apps, because you've got to be where the customer is today. And most people today are on a smartphone.
Absolutely.
And when you're putting out content, we can't take that Super Bowl ad that we created for television.
You just has 4 seconds of his attention.
Put it on TikTok directly, right? Because that won't work.
Yeah.
You've got to have native content.
And adaptable content to 4 seconds, 6 seconds.
100%.
Yeah.
So you're creating an Instagram reel for, 30 seconds or whatever.
Yeah.
You've got to have native content for that medium, for TikTok, for that medium, right? To engage the consumer there. So that's that. And then when you look at app downloads, thankfully today we are in a position where we are the most downloaded travel app in the world. And there's a reason why consumers are continuing to come back on there. So we're doing a tremendous amount of investment there to make sure that people are coming on the app and they're staying on the app. That comes back to our design sensibility. It comes back to our sense of experimentation as a company, the DNA of experimentation that we have. I'll give you an example there. We recently celebrated 20 years of our experimentation tool. We have an internal experimentation tool where product ideas are submitted. And so far in those 20 years, there have been more than 150,000 ideas that have been submitted, out of which 86,000 ideas have been stopped because we heard from consumers and consumers said, that doesn't work for me. So we stopped them.
Beautiful.
But at the same time, we've introduced 50,000 plus ideas.
Which
Which
perhaps
are
what the
working
consumers.
for consumers.
Wow.
Because we're constantly experimenting, hearing from consumers, and then deciding, again, through the use of data, does this work? Does this not work?
And-
right?
And do you think so? That is the motto of Booking.com, consumer first.
Consumer first, 100%.
In that case, both sides of the spectrum, stakeholders on the demand
And
side
partners.
and partners.
And we've got to keep doing it, right? Because we're a marketplace. If we don't innovate, we die. And then the last bit is the performance marketing aspect, right? Which is where you've got those billions of keywords on Google that we are bidding for. You've got multiple languages today that the platform is operating in, with 46 languages globally, including Hindi on the website and the app. So you've got to regionalize your content, right? If you want to reach a consumer,
For
you've
sure.
got to speak to them in their language. Right?
And does
So-
Booking.com, does the app can talk? Does it have a Hindi version as well?
Yes,
Oh, it
it does. So we've got Hindi in both the website and the app. And that, again, it's through data, right? Tomorrow, if our
It could
data
be
tells
anything.
us that there are people
Yeah,
wanting to use our platform in Tamil, maybe we will build a Tamil version. We don't know, right? Again, this is all data driven, right? So therefore, that's the last bit, right? So once we cover that entire funnel, it's about how are you engaging the consumer at all levels, and then making sure that ultimately all of that intent is converting into a transaction.
Beautiful. We spoke about global travel. We've spoken about Indian consumers. We've spoken about inbound travel, right? Let's go to the last segment. Say it as you see it, right?
I'll try.
Absolutely. If tomorrow, through the power to be, and you have 5 minutes to talk about India and that storytelling, and 10% of our audiences are global as well, right? What is that India storytelling you would tell everyone? We spoke about the India story, right?
Yeah.
How South Korea has a story. What is that India story? You would like all our international audiences to hear from you so that they come to India and experience this rich heritage of India.
Oh, for me, that's an easy one, Kunal. US, we want to double down on India. India is for the long term, right? I think I'm going to borrow what McKinsey's global CEO said, right? Bob Sternfels said, this is India's century, not India's decade, right? Because we have that demographic dividend, it'll keep on giving for the next few decades.
True.
It's tremendous when you think about the compounding effect
Absolutely.
this is going to have, right? If you're going to be able to sustain a rate of growth of 5, 6, 7% over the next 10, 20, 30 years, imagine what that's going to do for the country, right? And I think what I feel is that we are at an inflection point, right? And that's also the really interesting thing about India, right? What Joan Robinson said in 1970s, she's a very famous Cambridge economist. She said, everything that you say about India, the opposite is also true.
Yeah.
And that's still rings very true 50 years from when that quote was made, right?
That's the beauty of it, right?
That is the beauty
And
of
that's
it.
where the opportunity is also.
100%.
Yeah. If the
100%.
opposite wasn't true, it would have been more homogeneous.
Yes.
Right? In the heterogeneity is where the opportunity lies.
Yes.
In every aspect.
Yes. Yes.
Which one is your favorite airline?
Sorry?
Which one is your favorite airline?
Airline. Oh, look, I don't want to be partial to anybody, but
Okay, let's put it this way. I won't put you on a spotlight. Your wife's favorite airline.
I think if you ask if you ask my wife, she'll probably say SQ.
When we
But I also think a lot of the Middle Eastern carriers are
Qatar,
fantastic.
Qatar, Emirates,
I'm really, really hopeful of the way Air India is transforming.
Yeah, it'll take some time, but
it's a long-term story. Really, really hopeful there, and great to see how Indigo is doing as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Fantastic.
You have Peter. I know him very well, and the way he thinks, and of course the entire leadership behind Indigo, where they want to take Indigo.
Yeah.
They're no longer. None of these guys are thinking made for India anymore.
Yeah.
They're all thinking, can I be the best in the world right now?
Yeah.
So it's no longer subcontinent. It's no longer I'll play with the European players or some Middle Eastern players. They're thinking, how can I be the best in the world?
Yeah.
Including Air India with William and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that's important. Children's favorite destination. I will put you on a spotlight, and please don't say Indonesia.
No, I think my son likes Goa a lot, because I think only because he's been there a few times.
Yeah.
He's still very young. He's 7, so
Okay.
and we've gone to Goa probably more times than any.
And do you take the alternate accommodation as a family?
We do all different things.
Come and experience.
Every time it's different. One of the last times we actually went and stayed in the middle of a forest in Netravali, and my son was like, "Papa, where's the real Goa?" So for him, Goa is like beaches and whatnot, right? But it's the diversity again of experience, right? Goa also has that side.
This is one question which I have here. I'm just kind of thinking, how do I? Usually, I don't look at these cue cards, but which are those personal values which are non-negotiable for you?
Look, I think for me, there are 2 or 3 things that I can probably touch on, right? One is, I think, the collaboration and the teamwork, which is there in anything that you do. For me, that's a non-negotiable, because I think it comes from having a very strong background in a team sport. I've seen the power of what you can achieve when you're united in spirit and in mind, right? When you have a single-minded dedication toward a certain goal and you're all rowing in the same direction, what you can achieve is fantastic. So I think for me, that is probably very, very important, something that's non-negotiable. I think the other one is the think customer first mindset, right? I've always, by accident or whatever you can call it, been in roles where I've been with the customer, right? And I think that for me should never, anything that you do, always keep the customer in mind. And that should not necessarily be the case only if you're in an external role, right? Even if you're in an internal role, you could be in a finance function, you could be in an HR function, you could be doing a multitude of other internal roles. Think about who your stakeholders are, who your customers are, your internal customers, and always try to deliver accordingly, right? So I think those are a couple of things that I would mention.
What next, Santosh, 5 years down the line, for you on a personal front? Professionally, we have kind of spoken about, right? Are there things besides your professions that you really want to kind of do, whether it's golf, whether it's sports, whether it's something else, or maybe that playhouse, the woodwork that you kind of spoke about, does that still interest you?
That not so much anymore.
Okay.
That's a tried and tested thing. But I think, look, it's a little bit, it goes back to kind of, what I continuing to leave behind and give back as a person, right? I think that's something that I think about more and more. And I think for me, there are a couple of things that I'm starting to do. Number one is, I'm trying to find more time to mentor and coach people. It could be young executives, it could be students, etc. Unfortunately, time is limited, but wherever I have the opportunity, I tend to do that, because I think that's a great opportunity for me to give back in whatever way I can. It's also very stimulating for me to learn, right? Especially from the younger generation.
Yeah.
It's, that's where the world is moving, the Gen Zs and the Alphas. And I would love to learn more from that generation. The second thing I'm starting to do more and more is spend time with startups. There are, I find every opportunity wherever I can. Thankfully, I'm in a position today where I get approached by a lot of, especially people building in travel and hospitality. And wherever I can, I give back the time. In fact, I'm formally sitting on, in an advisory capacity with one particular startup. But even otherwise, there are a ton of other startups which I continue to have conversations with, because there is a tremendous amount of learning that I get from that as well, because I know the pulse of what's happening.
Yeah.
And second is, wherever I feel I have the ability to make a difference in somebody in their journey as they're building something new, it's a good opportunity for me to give back.
Can I give you an advice?
Sure.
Yeah. From a little older person.
100%.
Is give some time to institutions, not only like ISH, but many like ISH, especially in the hospitality domain. Not as a masterclass or anything, and it could mean maybe mentorship to one or two people spread over a period of time. And I'll tell you why. To your point, when India becomes that so-called inbound magnet, the only way we can do the spectrum of services and skill is you have students or potential students wanting to join hospitality at a skill level, and hospitality at a business level.
Yes.
At a skill level, India does not have a problem. And if he's talking hospitality, let me listen to him.
Yeah, no, 100%. I would love to do that, Kunal. Thank you for the suggestion. I also think it's, a little bit of the specialist versus generalist mindset. There is a great book, actually, that I, again, use as an example. It's called Range by David Epstein.
Okay.
Probably one of the best books I've read. And he makes a great example of Tiger Woods versus Roger Federer. Tiger Woods, who's a specialist, played golf from when he was
about 3 or 4 years old.
2 years old.
2 years old. Yeah.
And that's all he ever did in his life. Versus somebody like Roger Federer, who was exposed to multiple sports growing up. But eventually decided when he was, 10, 11, 12, that tennis is what he wanted to double down on. But that background of multiple sports helped him in a much different way, right? So for me, I identify more with the generalist mindset, at least looking at the kind of career I've had.
Got it.
But I think it's very interesting what you say as well, right? Because especially in hospitality, even in the aviation sector, people start with a very specialized skill set. And then you've got to, at some point, break out of that and move into a generalist mindset, right?
I'll put you on a spotlight. Your mom is listening to you and your wife is listening to you. Tell them what you have never told them in the last 2 years, 3 years. Be a little expressive to them right now.
Okay.
What would you tell them?
Look, I would tell them that they're fantastic role models in terms of what they do. I think as women, my wife is an entrepreneur.
Beautiful.
She's had her own thing for the last 12 years in a new category which never existed in India. She has persisted through it and she has built something that she can be really proud of.
More power to her.
So, they are the
anchors.
They are the, I would say, they run the house. So I'm just a member of the family. I might be a leader at work, but at home, I'm just following what my wife and mother tell me. So, I'm totally
what they say,
in awe of them.
Super. A farmer was one asked, what is the definition of a man? And a philosopher was also asked, what's the definition of a man? Obviously, the philosopher went philosophically, what's the definition of a man? But the farmer said, from women.
Okay.
At the end of the day, we are all product of our women.
Yeah.
Santosh Kumar, absolutely a pleasure having you on this talk show. You've been very open, very transparent. I can tell you for a fact that the newer generation will take very keen interest to what you have said. We will also list down all the books and the report which you mentioned. More success to you. more success to Booking.com, to your colleagues, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Kunal, for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.